red, malevolent, immortal. I want you to think about what these three adjectives describe. If your answer was lobster, then yes, you are correct. But there is something else these words apply to. Ladies and gentlemen, and those who are neither of the class, today I will be making my argument in favor of a remake of the 1950s movie, The Blob! So, to start from the beginning, what is The Blob? The Blob is a 1958 B movie that saw massive popularity upon release. Despite mixed reviews, it did numbers in the box office and even overtook several of the A films at the time. It's considered a cult classic among the horror genre and still sees viewership to this day for free in its entirety on YouTube. So why remake it? Well, to state the obvious, it's a beloved IP that hasn't seen any new content for about 40 years. 40 years? I thought The Blob came out in 1958, I hear you say. In my head, I hear you. That's because The Blob already has a remake. One in 1988. The film as well has mixed reviews, but was a commercial success as well. So again, if it has a remake, why another? Well, as the old adage goes, one movie does not a franchise make. Which is why my proposal for a remake of The Blob is a trilogy. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start simple. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the original. It's pretty close to what you would expect from an 80s horror flick. A meteor crashes into Earth, releasing a blob that latches onto an old man. Chaos ensues, more chaos ensues, and then the US government fixes the situation by freezing the blob and taking it to the Arctic. After which we get what I think might be a message about global warming?
What are they going to do with that thing, Dave?
Well, the Air Force is sending a globe master in. They're flying it to the Arctic.
It's not dead, is it?
No, it's not.
Just frozen.
I don't think it can be killed, but at least we've got it stopped.
Yeah, as long as the Arctic stays cold, huh?
All in all, a very entertaining piece with effects and acting that holds up pretty well. If I was alive in 1958 and my only other sources of entertainment were jackpot bowling with Leo Duricher, or the discovery of the radiation belt, I too would be pretty entranced. Of course, I wasn't alive in 1958. I was dead that year for tax purposes. So, let's get into what my remakes would look like. As I said, I'm proposing a trilogy, so let's break it down movie by movie, and then why I'm making the changes that I am. Let's start with the first one. There's a pretty immediate change here, as in this version, the blob is a bioweapon that was developed in a lab as opposed to some random spaced ejaculate. The first movie takes place within the lab where the blob was developed, following a group of people, as their goal quickly goes from trying to get out of the lockdown building to trying to take the blob with them as they die. Eventually it comes down to one last survivor, and in classic horror fashion, they blow up the building to try to take the blob with them. This does, in fact, destroy the blob. Particles of it get into the lungs of the crowd of first responders, news reporters, and loved ones who were gathered outside, setting up the next movie. I felt here that the change of origin was a necessary step to modernize the story, as a lot of cultural fear has shifted away from a fear of the unknown and more towards a fear of what we're eventually going to do to ourselves. Nuclear weapons, sure, but a fear of a weaponized disease and what it might do is something that me and a lot of my friends share. Either way, the next movie follows the spouse of the last survivor from the first movie, who gets pulled into the hospital. It turns out like there was an outbreak of this odd sickness causing a large amount of internal hemorrhaging and a large number of people related to the victims of the bioweapon lab. As you may have guessed, this is a bunch of small blobs growing inside of people, and this movie follows the spouse trying to escape the town that falls into chaos and confusion and a bunch of, like, into disarray and distrust, following, like, a bunch of people kind of, like, having the blobs be thrown up by them. The spouse eventually makes it out, and the last shot of the movie is the rearview mirror watching the blobs form into one giant mass. This is another attempt at, showing a modern issue through the lens of the Blob movies. I touched on it lightly in the summary, but, one of the plot points of the movie is that people refuse to trust each other. Some not coming to the initial checkup when the hemorrhaging first starts, and then others later, not being able to work together, because nobody knows who does have a blob or who doesn't. My idea for this is pretty influenced by that one Twilight Zone episode, the one where the aliens trick a bunch of people into killing each other by making them have just like the small amount of distrust. The last one takes place 8 months after the other two. At this point, the blob has become a large crisis within the US, and it kind of just rolls across the land, and, in its wake and in its coming, it displaces a lot of people, it kills a lot of people. It's basically like just a sentient natural disaster. The format for the film is a bunch of survivor stories intercut with Congress trying to come to an agreement on what should be done about the blob. Everybody agrees that the blob needs to go and that it's a problem, but they just can't agree on how to do it. Some want to keep it as a weapon, some want to try to nuke it, and then, some people are like, oh, we want to destroy the blob, but we don't want to drop a nuclear weapon within the US. And the UN offers aid at multiple points across the movie, but we see again and again Congress turning them down because they don't want the bioweapon falling into foreign power, because they, have their pride as American. Just a myriad of ideological reasons, and that's, of course, juxtaposed against the people who are suffering and dying because of the blob. Eventually, the survivor stories we've seen are brought before Congress by somebody in Congress, and that is what convinced them to accept aid from the UN, and the ending is the same as the original. They freeze the blob, transport it to Antarctica, and at the very end we get that last line again of,
But at least we've got it stopped.
Yeah, as long as the Arctic stays cold, huh?
This is, again, my attempt at putting a modern issue through the lens of the blob. I'm sure everybody's pretty well aware of the dissatisfaction with the speed at which Congress comes to decisions on everything but TikTok. And especially in times of crisis, what might be a bit less known is that America, in the wake of, I think, both Katrina, 9/11, and a lot of other disasters that have happened within America, pointedly turned down foreign aid because they didn't want to break the America ideal of independence. And so it's a lot of the issues within Congress is idealism, as opposed to what actually needs to happen for people who are suffering, dying. And I again wanted to show that through the lens of the blob. But of course, this is the part you're here for. How does this all tie into course theory? Well, first of all, my attempt with these movies is to have them be rewatchable, and each be kind of their own standalone story, but ones that also can be watched again on their own. Very much intended to be sold as a package to a streaming service. The rewatchability angle I'm getting pretty directly from the readings of Barbara Klinger in her Once Is Not Enough section of Beyond the Multiplex. The Blob, at the time of its release, was a movie that was watched again and again. And in 2024, the full release of the film is free on YouTube, and I think it's gotten 700,000 views, and it was just uploaded mid-2023, which is, again, pretty good for a full-length movie on YouTube. Rewatchability is something that's definitely very central to the Blob as a my choice to do a remake as well was from the first reading, I think, where we talked about Elizabeth Guider's There's Simply No Way to Couch This, Hollywood Would Rather because that and a lot of the course content just talks again and again about how companies want remakes like someone who's addicted to peanut butter wants peanut, because it's usually cheaper, simpler, and safer to remake a movie instead of just having it be one thing. My idea to make it a triple thing, again talking about IPs, is from our class's discussion over Jess Cook's theories, where we really did come up with we really did come up with the fact that Hollywood doesn't want movies anymore. It wants IPs. It wants sets of movies. It wants stuff that it can sell and repeatedly sell. So The Blob, starting as 3 movies, is definitely something I could see expanding into more movies after the fact. The proverbial kicking of a dead horse. My choice to remake a classic horror film is from the, Risen of the Vault section of Merchants of Menace, The Business of Horror Cinema, which covered, like, all the horror pieces that got remade. I remember seeing that and thinking, like, The Blob is just a movie that begs a remake. So again, why remake The Blob? Simple, clean, easy. It's an IP, it's a money-making opportunity, and it's not being taken advantage of currently.